Tom Clark's Main Event is a Boink Studios production. Follow us on Twitter at Boink Studios and check out our Facebook page where you can see all of our projects, past, present, and future. And now, on with the show.
This is Daddy's show. Step off.
Hey, what is up? That's right, folks, we're back again. Welcome to the program. Thank you for tuning in. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Tom Clark, and you are listening to Tom Clark's Main Event. This, my friends, is episode number 40 of the podcast. That's right, folks, the big 40, we've hit it. Thank you for checking us out. If you are coming back today, again, for repeat visit, we say welcome back. If you're listening for the first time, dude, thanks for tuning in. I appreciate the listen. And to all of those involved, we extend to you, as always, the customary laurel and a hearty handshake for the 40th time, people. That's what we're doing here today. If you listen to episode number 39, you are well aware of today's topic. And on top of that, you probably read the title of the show. And if you did, well, then you already know. So why am I even teasing the fact? But hey, that's kind of my shtick, man. I tell you what I'm going to do, and then I attempt to do it. I don't always succeed, but I do what I can. This is episode number 40. This is part 2 of the two-parter. Isn't that convenient how that worked out? The two-parter that we like to call Old School. Okay? And Old School, of course, if you're a pro wrestling fan, means a lot of things. For this particular pro wrestling fan and pro wrestling journalist, it means specifically the old days, the good old fun days, the happy fun time days of professional wrestling. More specifically, the National Wrestling Alliance, Jim Crockett Promotions, man. And this is what it's all about. So let's go ahead and no more pleasantries being exchanged here, Lord Vader. Let's go ahead and get to this sucker right now. Part 2, the main event. It's Old School. Part 2. That's what we're doing. When last we left our favorite pro wrestling journalist, he was discussing the very sad and really badly timed in a lot of ways and very unfortunate car accident of Magnum TA, who was to be one of the next top guys in the NWA for Jim Crockett Promotions. And as we said before during the last episode, this was not to suggest that he was going to replace Ric Flair on a permanent basis. This was just to suggest that for a change, that Jim Crockett Promotions would have 3 viable top guys. Magnum was really good. He was not a top guy, okay? You had Rick, you had Dusty, and you had no one else. The third guy's spot would have been filled by Magnum TA, who could, in possibility, I'm saying, Magnum's career could have lasted longer than Dusty's in the ring, okay? Physically, he was in better shape. All due respect to Big Dust. I love me some Dust. The guy was my surrogate father at that time. My replacement dad in a lot of ways, which I've talked about here on the program many times. I'm talking about from physical conditioning aspect, which, by the way, was one of the few things that kept Magnum from getting killed that night and helped his rehabilitation to where he could actually walk again, was the fact that he was in tremendous physical shape when the accident happened. But as we said before during during part 1, that was a turning point for Jim Crockett Promotions in my estimation. It changed the way they did business. It changed the way they did a lot of things in my estimation. And it basically took out the option for the third top guy. Because in my opinion, all due respect to Arn, to Tully, to Ricky Morton, to other guys, to Wahoo, to Nikita, to Ron Garvin, to Barry Windham. Love me some Barry Windham. Oh my God, we're going to talk about Barry today. Isn't that going to be fun? But all due respect to all those guys, I always saw the NWA as having 2 primary top main event guys, and that was Rick and Dusty. And everybody else was a close number 3, but not quite the number 3. Does that make any sense at all? Now, we talked a little bit about, Taisha talked a lot about the turning point for the NWA. What a turning point happened for WWF on the other side of the pond there, if we could say that word, was the fact that WrestleMania happened. And the first WrestleMania changed everything for WWF. And how did WrestleMania become a success? How was it that WrestleMania got over the way it did? How is it that the first initial card, the first initial edition of WrestleMania got over the way it did? That's because everybody booked on that show, dude, was like the territory guys. I mean, all you have to do is go back and look at the card. Because the first WrestleMania happened actually a year prior to Matt Adams' accident, which was 1985. And, you know, it represented a turning point for the World Wrestling Federation in as much as they went pop culture during that time. They embraced mainstream media, and mainstream media began to embrace them. Okay? But again, how did that all come about? Again, no training facility at that time that I'm aware of, that I've ever heard about. All right? But look at the card for the first WrestleMania. Tito Santana, King Kong Bundy, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, Matt Bourne, Brutus Beefcake, JYD, who came up in Mid-South, Greg the Hammer Valentine, who, you know, got over in Jim Crockett Promotions. Okay? Dude, Mike Rotundo and Barry Windham. Barry Windham. Big Barry, as Flair called him. Speaking of old school, and again, I firm believer that the first WrestleMania would never have happened had not been for territory guys that Vince McMahon signed, because they were the strength of that card. They were that card, period, okay? And Hulk Hogan from the territories came from the AWA. There you go. But Roddy Piper in the main event, Hot Rod, really? Oh my God, more on Roddy later. But Barry Windham, who's your favorite horseman? Not horseman, but horsemen. Who's your favorite lineup? Because my favorite lineup was the addition with Barry. Rick, Tully, Arn, Barry. Now, the original horseman, of course, was Rick, Tully, Ole, and Arn. Ole Anderson. One of the most bitter guys you've ever seen in the history of pro wrestling. The guy that, and yes, it's not just a rumor, it's not just a tall tale, it actually happened. Ole Anderson, who went to Vince McMahon and or Linda and or both, or each, whatever it was, some function they had for the NWA, I think it was. And he said, as far as I'm concerned, you and your wife can go F yourselves. Well, you know, Ole wasn't the brightest bulb in the box. He spoke his mind, but to his own detriment, because he never had a future in the business after WCW fell. And with very good reason. It's a shame. Ole was a smart guy. One of the most natural, most organic heels that I've personally ever seen or ever heard cut a promo in my entire life. Ole could scare you to death and never had to scream because he was precise. To me, Ole Anderson was a serial killer. Okay, he was that quiet guy that was a serial killer. He was brutish. He was that guy in a restaurant that you did not approach if he stared you down, because man, if he stared you down, you left him alone. You know what I'm saying? In my opinion, Mark Henry has a lot of Ole Anderson in him, where he just has that look where he could just tear you apart. But he, despite his size, he could be a nice guy, but he could tear you apart as well. And that's what I always got from Ole, was that cold, cynical, that cold, merciless, that cold, assassin-like quality in the eyes of Ole Anderson. But Barry Windham, in a lot of people's minds, not only replaced Ole, but you know, rose higher than Ole ever did in the Horsemen. Barry fit the mold of the Four Horsemen a lot better. No one could really picture Ole with, you know, a martini in his hand and a lovely woman on his arm, because that wasn't what Ole was. This is not what he did. You know what I mean? But Barry fit the mold. So in a lot of ways, Barry was a better horseman in terms of the style of the group. Maybe not in terms of ground and pound like Ole was, but in terms of style. Barry was one of the most naturally gifted athletes that this business has ever known. One of my favorites of all time. He had the body, he had the height, he had the storytelling ability. He could cut a promo. He could work lights out. Dude could hang with Ric Flair. We talked in episode, I keep wanting to say episode 1. Episode 39. Oh my God. Talk about old school. I'm old. I put the old and old school, Jack. I'll tell you right now. But we talked a lot in episode 39, thank you very much, about the Horsemen. And we talked about and I got to get a little bit more into the impact of it here, but Big Barry Windham, what an immense talent. He had everything it took to become World Heavyweight Champion. He did. But in my opinion, they did not quite strike while the iron was hot for Barry. That's no disrespect to Ric Flair, who, as we said in the last episode, made a career out of making guys look good. He didn't have to work very hard with Barry. He had to work hard with some guys from other areas, from other territories. He didn't have to work very hard with Barry Windham because Barry was, like you said, a naturally gifted athlete, the son of Blackjack Mulligan. And, oh my God, dude. And by the way, the uncle of one Bray Wyatt, isn't that something? Uncle Barry. Isn't that great stuff, man? The lineage that's being passed down. I hope that one day they'll be able to actually go into that and to reveal it to the world and to sort of revel in it. I'm okay if they keep it secret for right now and they just don't ever really talk about it. That's okay too. But because we all know, pro wrestling fans know, the true fans know that who Bray really is and everything and all that stuff. But again, in terms of the lineage, in terms of passing it down from one generation to the next, and Bray does an admirable job in his character. Good worker, excellent talker, one of the best that company has. He's best on the stick, in my opinion. When Heyman's not on the card, Bray's the best on the stick by far. But Barry fit the mold. Okay, Barry did not, Rick didn't have to do much. He didn't have to carry Barry at all. Barry was really good, very good at what he did. Another guy who fit the mold, or not the mold, but had the body type of Barry was Sam Houston. Remember Sam? That was Jake the Snake Roberts' half-brother, step-brother, half-brother, I think it was. Sam Houston, man. And you want to know why Sam got over? He was a young, good-looking kid who was tall, had a great look, had the cowboy boots. But he also was best friends on air with Dusty Rhodes. He was one of Dusty's boys, what Tully called the risky business boys. There was Sam Houston, there was Magnum TA, Barry Windham was one of them at the time. And that's what it was. And Sam, for me, was one of those great, what Austin would refer to as a white meat baby face. He can just do no wrong. He's really good at being really good. You know what I mean? And that's what he was. And the territory days, they were rife with guys like that. And that's what it should have been. But to me, that's old school. To me, those are the days that I watched and the days that I grew up with. And it was some awesome stuff. We talked about the NWA and the growth of the NWA. What happened was, and this is how the change, this is before Magnum and everything else of Jim Crockett Promotions, but the territory system began to wane. Why is that? Because Ric Flair started being on TV more and more and more. Okay? Because the program started to get over more, started being shown in more places. And so when Rick came to town, it wasn't as much of a draw as it was before. We talked about before, Rick came to town, you sold out. Maybe not selling out quite as fast now. They still loved him, or hated him, and wanted to see him get his butt kicked, whichever, and respected him to the moon. But at the same time, they could just watch him on TV and not have to go anywhere. If they couldn't afford to go to a show, who cares? They could watch him on TV for free. You see what I'm saying? And then, of course, the other killer for the territory system was Vincent Kennedy McMahon, who had bought the company from his father in '82, renamed it World Wrestling Federation from Worldwide Wrestling Federation, and started buying up all the territory help. And it basically was maybe the chief reason why the territory system folded as quickly as it did. He bought Georgia Championship Wrestling in '84, merged it with WWF. Jim Crockett was still going strong, okay? And Jim Crockett was able to go national by virtue of the fact they had all these territories under its banner that would put their wrestling on TV on the local networks. And so they started going national, okay? Crockett began buying out some of the guys who were on the NWA board of directors, started buying out their promotions. And sometimes those guys just went out of business and Jim just took their rosters in. The UWF was one of them. That's where we've got Jim Ross, Jumpin' Jim Ross. Okay. And everything was going pretty well. And again, in '86, I was a major fan, still am now, of those days. But something else happened in '86, not just Magnum's accident, but in February of that year, Fritz von Erich took world-class championship wrestling away from the NWA. Okay. And here's what happened from that. They became their own company. They became their own promotion. It was a world-class champion whereas there's a regional title. Again, we talked before about regional titles being considered being called world titles. And that's basically what it was. The AWA was a member. Vern Gagne was a member. And of the NWA, they left. Okay, they left actually way before Fritz von Erich did. They left in 1960 and formed the American Wrestling Association, the AWA. Okay, so you had the AWA and you had World Class that left because, you know, despite how great the system was and how much money all the guys could make, when you have everyone basically voting for one guy, there's not a lot of room for any other guys. And I believe that sometimes ego got in the way of it. When you got a guy like Fritz von Erich that ran his own company and he was the star of that company and he knew he was a guaranteed draw, Vern was the same way. He knew he was a guaranteed draw. Those guys are going to eventually feel like they can run it themselves. So they did. They split. And that's what happened. So slowly but surely, the NWA began to splinter up. And then later on, as we said, Vince McMahon makes his presence known, starts buying up all the talent from the territory, starts building the WWF up to what we know today on the backs of guys from the territory system. And without those guys, he would have no talent. You see what I mean? That's what it was all about at the time. So Bill Watts, and this was something that had happened at the time, owned Mid-South Wrestling, and he did not want to join the NWA. Okay, but he renamed Mid-South the Universal Wrestling Federation because he wanted to go national like Vince had. But Jim Crockett ended up buying him out in '87. Okay, because Watts, by the way, Watts one of the best creative minds in the history of pro wrestling, along with Dusty. Ole was as well, in my opinion. But Dusty and Cowboy Bill Watts were two of the best minds the business has ever seen. But you know, Bill Watts went bankrupt. It's a lot of money to consistently run a show. And I can tell you this, again, going back to when I got in, we ran every Saturday night because we had a building. We had a guarantee, pretty much guaranteed building. As long as we paid the rent every Saturday night, we were good. We were golden, okay? And we cleaned the place up after the show and took care of the place as best as we could for it to be an old Legion Hall. The floors were nasty, so when we left, they were nasty because they were nasty when we got there. You see what I'm saying? We did our best to clean it, but it was atrocious. The conditions were not favorable, but it was a guaranteed spot every Saturday night, more or less. As long as we made enough money to make the rent, we were good, okay? So I had the ability as a storyline guy to write storylines and plan it out for a month at a time. How many guys have that local pro wrestling today when you're not even guaranteed a venue every week, man? So we had it guaranteed every Saturday. But what happened was, and I remember one night we're at the show and the promoter looks at me and he just shakes his head. I'm like, what's up? And he goes, we're killing this town. I'm like, what? And he said, and he said it all the time, but he was right. He said, we're killing this town. You can't run every week. We can't afford to run every week. And even if we could, you know, we're going to kill this town. And it's straight up, he was right. I remember when I started with the company, we were averaging, I'm wanting to say around 75 fans every week, maybe 100. And by the time we folded, we were down to about 20. And half those 20 were families of the guys in the show. It was a shame. But I mean, you know, everything has its natural rise and its natural fall. We plateaued as a company, as it were. And, I mean, it is what it is. It happened. I mean, not much we could do about it. It ended up the way it ended up. And I miss those days. But that's the downfall. Those are the potential pitfalls of being a pro wrestling promoter. Is if too much exposure can be a bad thing. And they say, you know, too much publicity is not bad. Well, yeah, it can be. Which is what I think happened to the territory system those days. A lot of promoters just couldn't afford to keep going. The overhead was too much. I mean, and when you got main event guys who are loyal to you, who keep busting their hump for you, despite not getting paid, eventually they're going to say, dude, I got to eat. I can't wait anymore. I've been loyal to you. I've done everything to help make your show good. I got to eat now myself. You see? And that, I think, is what happened in ECW, the original ECW. When you had guys like Taz leaving, the Dudley Boys leaving, they're like, look, we've done all we can do here. Just give us $1 more. And Paul couldn't do it. On principle, he couldn't do it. And I understand. But that's what happened to a lot of the old territory guys, was that they just couldn't hang anymore. Vince McMahon had too much money. He had too much pull. He had too much clout. He had too many resources. And his resources were piling up. And that's what happened to the territory system. It's a shame. But a lot of those guys, in my opinion, some of those guys, maybe a lot of them, but some of them for sure, had no problem selling out the Vince when he came knocking because they were tired. You know what I mean? And I remember when we folded up and we had to close up shop for various different reasons. But I remember when the promoter called me, he's like, "Well, we're done. They threw us out." And just like it when ECW lost TV, when we lost our building, we were over. We were done. Okay. And I remember getting the phone call, and you would think that my initial reaction would have been, "Oh, dude, really?" My initial reaction was I kind of let out a breath. And I was like, okay. And like I was upset, but I wasn't, because I was tired too. The politics that can happen backstage in pro wrestling are brutal. And we had a very small promotion with a roster of, 20 guys at our peak, sometimes 25 at our best. And so we had talent. You would not believe the backstage politics, the drama, the ridiculousness of the whole thing. It happened quite a bit. Happened more than you could ever possibly realize. You know about the stuff you hear from backstage stories now on the network and things like that, and books you've read, that biographies of certain pro wrestlers that are out there. But dude, we were in a small town. We ran every week. We were drawing at our best 75 to 80 fans to 100, and at our worst 20. You would not believe we had more politics in that locker room than you could shake a stick at. It was crazy. So I was relieved it ended. I mean, I look back on it now and I wish there was a way we could have salvaged it, but at the time there was no way to do it. And there just wasn't. And it would have been nice to have been able to. I stayed in the business for a few more years after that, off and on, sporadically, but never on a full-time thing. And it sucked for me, quite honestly, because as I said, man, I grew up an old school fan. That's the way I presented myself. I was an old school heel manager. My name was Bishop. I was an old school heel manager. I was one of the guys, we went to another company one night, ran our gimmick, and one of the boys in the locker room called me an evil Paul Heyman. I said, "Man, you killed it out there." That's all I was trying to do. I was just trying to be that sort of that modern day version of the classic pro wrestling heel manager that was just, how dare you look at me? You don't know who you're talking to. The guy I manage, he's going to take over the world, and here's how he's going to do it. And, if as soon as the ref turns his back, I'm going to help him do it. And I mean, like, who do you think you are talking to me that way? And so, dude, you had to live the part. And I mean, that was part of the old school appeal. Now, let's take everything that we've talked about. Let's talk about the last episode, this episode up to this point in terms of old school, and narrow it all down to this right here. A lot of people equate old school with silly pro wrestling fans. Do you want to know why? Because during those days, people believed it was real. Now, here's the thing. My kid is 7 and believes in Santa Claus. And he asked me one day, he says, "Daddy, is Santa Claus real?" And anytime he asks me a question of this nature, I will say to him, "Well, son, what do you think?" And he'll say, "Well, I think he's real." And I say, "Son, if you think Santa Claus is real, then he's absolutely real." And then I went into great detail about how real he was. Okay? Because he's 7. And that's it. All right? No more questions asked about that. So I equate that answer to a lot of what I equate to pro wrestling. Because what's the catchphrase? It's still real to me. That's it in a nutshell. Is it real to you? Don't worry about what everyone else says. Don't worry about what your best friend says or your worst enemy says, or the jerk online that has to sound smart because he found some blog that would publish his drivel. Don't worry about that cat. Worry about what you think. How real is it to you? The word real is very subjective when it comes to pro wrestling. Did the crowd of that day believe it was real? Of course it did. Did all of them? No way, no chance. Go back and look at the old tapes, at the old footage of the NWA, Jim Crockett Promotions in particular, okay, JCP. Go back and look it up, because when Dusty did something, when he popped off the elbow and the right hands, the crowd would boom every time. You could audibly hear that sound effect from the crowd. They did it every time. And then during Flair versus Steamboat, talk about old school, man. Flair versus Steamboat, Flair versus Wyndham, Flair versus Rhodes, Flair versus Steamboat, Flair versus Magnum, Flair versus the World. That might be an upcoming episode of the podcast. How about that? Flair versus the World. God, write that stuff down. That's excellent, man. I'm going to make a note of it right now, actually. There you go. So, But Flair versus Steamboat, go back and watch those old matches, those classic, the 3 matches they had, classic matches, okay? 89, I believe it was. I mean, just some amazing stuff. But the crowd, not 100% of that crowd was standing up. You can see people sitting down with their arms folded, shaking their heads, and just scrutinizing every single move, every single word of every single promo. And that's where it started to creep in, I believe, was during that time frame. When you got to the 90s, it was really there, especially when WWE came out on TV, Vince McMahon came out on TV and said, this is sports entertainment. By the way, we're not trying to really hurt each other. This is not legitimate sports competition. We're not trying to really win gold belts. We're not trying to really win matches or win anything else, really, except your wallet. You see what I mean? It's okay for a promoter to want to make money. We wanted to make money too when I was in it. That's the whole point of pro wrestling. If you're a promoter, is to make some cash. You can have a great heart for the business. You can have more passion and drive than anybody that's ever known you has ever seen. But you have to turn a profit or you will go out of business. All of the heart and passion for the business in the world won't put money in your wallet. Straight up. Okay? Nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, the magician doesn't come out before his act and tell you that everything you're about to see is not real. It's an illusion. Who wants to hear that? I mean, when you went to see the Avengers, did Joss Whedon come out before the Avengers started on a clip and say, none of what you're about to see is real. We're just here to make you entertain, have fun watching? No, of course not. Because that's a killer. We already know these are actors portraying roles. But when I look at Robert Downey Jr. and Iron Man, I see Tony Stark. Do you see what I mean? When I heard Dusty Rhodes cutting a promo, I didn't see Virgil Runnels. I saw Dusty Rhodes. That's what it's all about. And thanks to Vince, thanks to several other things that happened and began to happen, slowly but surely, that doubt that had always been around about pro wrestling had grown to a massive proportion to the point of, and I'm telling you right now, I was a fan in the mid-'80s, early 80s, mid-'80s, and since then, that's when I started. And dude, I can tell you for sure, it was not a popular thing in my neck of the woods to call yourself a pro wrestling fan. I live down south. And you would think, oh my God, down south, pro wrestling this, pro wrestling that. Dude, there was many times during the course of me being a fan as a kid that I wouldn't tell anyone I was a fan. What's that on your t-shirt? Nothing. You know what I mean? I mean, dude, straight up. So, there was that to think about. And I mean, honestly, if you really want to talk about being embarrassed by something, try being a pro wrestling fan back when the steroid stuff from WWF hit, dude. I mean, what a terrible time. It's like being a baseball fan during the Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa, Barry Bonds nonsense was happening, dude. What a terrible time to be a baseball fan, man. Horrendous, dude. Horrendous. Because, you had all these people criticizing your sport. I've had to endure everything from the word fake to steroids to the Chris Benoit thing and everything in between and since then. Kids getting accidentally killed, hurting each other, crippling each other in wrestling matches in their bedroom, to everything in between. And I'm still here. I'm still a fan because I still believe in the beauty of the art of pro wrestling. It's an art form. It's the one true American art form. It's American theater. Okay, straight up. And old school days were the best days of that theater, in my opinion. Honestly. But you had, during those days, again, the doubt was beginning to creep in. But before it began happening, dude, the crowd were the best part of the matches, man. I mean, hard to not watch, actually physically watch Dusty and Rick in the ring. But the next time you get a chance, watch the crowd around them. And don't focus on the guys in the ring for a minute or two. Just watch the crowd. Listen to them. Those hot arenas, those smoky arenas, those people look like they're ready to take their shirts off because it's so hot. Everybody's sweating and it's just, oh my God, why are they staying there the whole time? Because they love pro wrestling. Because they came there to see a show and they got entertained every time, man. That's what guys like Dusty did. It's what they brought to the table. The promos that Dusty would cut, as we said before, would book people into the building long before the show ever got there. Sold tickets months, a year in advance sometimes. It just depended on what it was. But, it just amazing stuff, man. And those were the days. And if you ever want to get a feeling of nostalgia, if you were around during those days, or if you just want to go back and say, I'm getting tired of hearing what Tom talk about old school all the time, I want to see it for myself, then go Google it, man. Go to the network, which, by the way, kudos to WWE Network for putting the World Championship Wrestling programs from Saturday mornings on the network. Thank God, Mid-South is on there now. Global Wrestling Federation is on there now. World Class is on there. AWA is on there. They got old ECW on there, and of course WCW. But they're finally doing their part to get the old school stuff on there. Now, whether it's because there's been a demand, which I would hope there has been, or they did it because it's just the right thing to do, because they got all this footage, all this archival footage, and they just might as well do something with it. No matter what the reason may be, it's on there for a reason. Why not use it? Why not? I mean, you're sitting on all these tapes, on all this footage. Digitize that stuff and get it on the network, dude. That's what it's all about. And thank God that they are finally, because I get to watch World Championship Wrestling instead of having to YouTube it. You know what I mean? Which I'll still do that. It's fine, but getting to watch this stuff and see it in the format it was presented in when I was a kid. I remember one of Dusty's promos on one of these shows has been bleeped out because he said something a little foul about Baby Doll, which was funny as crap to me. But anyway, those are the old school days, man. That's what we're talking about. It was just some of the best time ever. Great time to be a pro wrestling fan. Great time to watch the business, to get exposed to it, to get your favorites going, and just support these guys. I mean, we're talking about, were they actors? Yes, but they were athletes as well. And we said at the beginning of the other episode that the terms old school are used quite a bit now, and sometimes are used too loosely. Old school has been used to describe Kevin Owens, and I've used it as well. I said that Owens is old school in every sense of the word, and he is because he has the old school body. Okay, Kevin Owens looks like one of the old NWA guys, except he's got a shirt on. Those old NWA guys didn't mind showing you their gut. You know what I mean? Whether they were tan or not, Dick Murdoch was a great example of that, a guy that had a gut. He could work. Don't misunderstand me, but he never really prided himself on having a great physique. You know what I mean? So Owens is a throwback to those days. Old school body, old school mentality. You know, he gets cheered, but he does his best to get rid of those cheers, to criticize the fans, tell the fans, hey, you know what, suck it, or whatever it is he says to them. But he doesn't want to hear it, because you shouldn't want Kevin Owens to win a match. You shouldn't want Kevin Owens to get over. You shouldn't want him to win a belt. You shouldn't want to do anything positive, because honestly, Kevin is a heel. You should hate Kevin Owens' guts, and you should. And if you don't, you're doing it wrong. You got to play along, man. I have all the respect in the world for Kevin, but when I'm watching the show, I want to get into it. And I appreciate the art form that's behind it. But that's because Kevin Owens is so old school, because he brings that mentality to his game. And a lot of guys do that, but he's probably the best example of it right now. Old school Kevin Owens. And, you know, Steve Corino had that gimmick, but maybe they could bring that back. Old school Kevin Owens. It might work. Who knows? Kevin Old School Owens. Not bad. Sounds like a boxing name. Kevin Old School Owens. I don't know, dude. We'll see. But the question of whether or not Owens can get over for the championship is an intriguing one. Who was the last guy to have the belt that was what you consider to be out of shape? Was it Mick Foley? I mean, it's a legitimate question, isn't it? I mean, look at the guys that have had it since him. Randy Orton, The Rock, John Cena, CM Punk, Seth Rollins, Daniel Bryan. Guys who were all in physically great shape. Who was the last guy out of shape to have that belt? I mean, honestly, Great Khali, you could argue, but Great Khali was in fantastic shape for a man his size. Straight up, dude. Straight up. He couldn't work worth a lick. That's not really the point, though, is it? But, you know, I think that Owens has a big road ahead of him, a tough hill to climb, if I'm being honest with you. It all falls on the shoulders of WWE Creative. And Creative can learn a thing or two from the old days, from the old school days of pro wrestling. I talked before about the turning point of Magnum TA's accident. I got another turning point for you, and I want you to really think about this one. The first time I ever saw a guy in the NWA, and when I looked at him in the ring, I just went, Do you know what I mean? Do you know what the means? That sound, if you're a pro wrestling fan, you know exactly what that translates to. That sound translates to, he's not really all that good. Do you see what I'm saying? Even the jobbers on World Championship Wrestling on Saturday mornings on TBS could work. Well, they had to be able to, because even in squash matches, if they didn't bump correctly, you see what I'm saying? Even if all they could do was bump really well, they're still working, right? So even those guys could work. I had not been accustomed as a kid, a kid before his teens and after. I had not been accustomed to seeing a guy that really couldn't work that well. Now, people bagged on Nikita for a lot of reasons. And they said that, because Crockett found him in a gym. He was a weightlifter, and Jim said, "You look amazing." And he was in the ring like by the weekend, I think is how the story went. Hadn't even been trained. He just said, "Stand there and throw clotheslines. We'll train you later." Because he thought he looked amazing. And Nikita stuck to his character. He learned a few Russian words. And he never appeared in public without speaking Russian. So he stuck to his character all the time, even backstage in the locker room, is what I was told. Isn't that awesome stuff? But I thought Nikita was a fine worker. I didn't say he was Barry Windham, but I thought he was good. But the one time I can recall seeing a guy, and I can't even say it was the Warlord. I mean, people could look at Warlord and just start to point at, oh, he's got a body. I see. That's what we're going with here. Okay. You see what I'm saying by that? That he's got the body, but he doesn't have much else. For me, that didn't really begin with the Warlord. It began with Lex Luger. Because for the first time that I could recall at that time, I had a guy who looked like an action star straight out of Hollywood. Looked like he could hang with Sylvester Stallone in a film. Straight up. Like he could kick Sylvester Stallone's butt in a movie. But I did not believe in him as a pro wrestler. He had a great physique, but he couldn't talk. He fumbled over his words. I remember him cutting promos. Before I even knew what the term cutting promo was, he would give an interview is what I knew it to be. And J.J. Dillon was standing behind him because they brought him in as a member of the Horsemen. And he fumbled over his words. And I remember looking at a friend of mine and going, what was that? Like, you could audibly hear. I mean, I could feel the crowd just beginning to go, oh my God. You see what I'm saying? Now, Lex, for any negative points that he had, brought some positive aspects. In Flair's book, To Be the Man, he says that really Lex was the first of them to come in with an agent. And he would talk to Rick just on a one-on-one basis and say, dude, you need to go after every penny you can. You need to get some representation. Don't go to the bat. Don't let somebody else go to bat for you with the promoters. Don't do it yourself. They're going to try to sell you on something that you don't want to hear. They're going to try to make it sound good to you. But an agent with some experience in this can tell if you're getting worked or not. See what I'm saying? And Lex was the beginning of the advent, in my opinion, of the big money contracts because he had a big money body, right? Lex looked amazing in the ring. I mean, in terms of physically. Couldn't work a lick. Dude, he could not work. And I don't care what anyone says. People later on claim he's going to be the second coming of Hulk Hogan. Brother, no way, no chance. He'd been the second coming of Hulk Hogan as much as he couldn't work. I mean, all due respect, you know what I'm saying? It's not me on a personal level, don't get me wrong here. But Les couldn't work, neither could Hogan. Hogan got over because of what he was, because of the promotional machine of the WWF, and because of what he contributed in terms of style, personality, and charisma. But he couldn't work a lick. Roddy made him look good. Savage made him look good. Everybody he worked, DiBiase made him look amazing. But Hulk by himself with a guy that was maybe as talented as he was or less talented than he was, he couldn't work his way out of a paper bag, straight up. And to me, Lex was that version of Hulk Hogan for the NWA, just not the top guy. But I remember as a kid, again, I saw him and I thought, and now years later, I can look back and say there was another turning point for the company because it ushered in a whole new way of thinking. It was no longer about we need guys like Jim Crockett needs guys that sound good, that can draw you in with their promos and can work lights out in the ring. Suddenly it wasn't just about that. It was about, oh my God, they have to be a bodybuilder. Oh my God, they have to look like this. Oh my God, they have to look like that. I mean, Lex was ripped. Dude. I mean, his abs could, cut paper for crying out loud. It was amazing. But, at the same time, he couldn't work in the ring. And it was obvious. It was obvious to everyone, every match he ever had. The best Lex ever looked was against guys who could work. Barry, Rick, Tully and Arn. I mean, it's no wonder that Crockett saw a body. He saw dollar signs. He saw an incredible physique. He saw a body that women would die for. And men would love to have, women would love to be on top of. If I can just be graphic with you for a second. But that's what he saw, and he said, "Man, I can make some money with this guy." Okay, and so who'd he put him with? The best talent he had. You put the guy that's the least talented with the best workers you have. Why do you think Ultimate Warrior worked the guys that he worked? Honestly, why did Ultimate Warrior work Goldust? Why did Ultimate Warrior work these guys that could actually go in the ring? Because they needed to hide Ultimate Warrior's weaknesses, and he had a lot of them. And Lex had a lot of weaknesses too. Okay, he just didn't have it. He had the body. He had the look. Sid Vicious had the look. Sid could cut some pretty good promos next to Lex. I mean, next to Lex, Sid looked like Ric Flair cutting a promo. Let's just be straight about it. But Sid did not have, he was irrational at times. He was too brutish. Had the best body I've ever seen on a pro wrestler. I mean, find me a better one. I'm talking about proportion, the height, proportion to strength. My God, Sid looked amazing, man. He did. But Lex was the turning point for me as a fan. And years later now, again, I look back at it and I say that was a turning point for that company as well, for that promotion. Because it really changed a lot of things. You know what I mean? And we talked about the old school bodies. Jimmy Garvin, who, again, I'm a big fan of Jimmy Garvin. Jimmy Garvin had an old school body as well. He wasn't out of shape, but he wasn't Lex Luger either. But Jimmy could work, dude. He could work lights out. And that's what you wanted. You want a little bit of everything. And it's not that you're compromising. Don't misunderstand me here. I mean, Punk was very streamlined. He wasn't ripped, but he was streamlined, in great shape, and could work his tail off in the ring, dude. Daniel Bryan was, I mean, he's in really good shape physically. He's cut and everything, but he could work lights out in the ring. So it's possible to have both. I'm not saying it's impossible. Flair had a great body in his prime, and he could work. Oh, my God, he was a great worker, dude. He was. But I'm just saying it's not impossible to have all of that together. It's just that at different times on the old days, the old school, JYD didn't have a body. Oh my God, JYD had a truckload of charisma. JYD was of the same vein as Superstar Billy Graham, as Dusty Rhodes, who just, they could talk you into the building. Straight up. They could just talk you in, man. I mean, it was just one of those things where, you heard him cut a promo and you're like, I have to go see this match. Or I've got to tune in Saturday night. I have to watch it. I'll call him to work. I don't care what I got to do. I've got to see this match. That's how good he was, because he fought for you. I mean, Jimmy Valiant had a lot of that too. The everyman, fighting for the people, daddy, that kind of thing. You know what I mean? My peoples. Because that's the jive he taught. He had the shuck and jive, right? He had that way to connect to the fans, as a lot of the old school guys did. They could connect to the crowd. They could connect to the fans, okay? And if you don't have that connection, I mean, straight up, if you don't have that connection, you're going to die a slow and miserable death as a pro wrestler. And you don't want that. You want to have that connection. You want to be able to get over and stay over. That's the point of the whole thing, right? But there's a reason why the terms old school are still being used today, because people have a fascination with it. And dude, if you did not grow up during that era, hey, you've got to go research this stuff, man. Go watch the network. And when I say old school, I'm not talking about Attitude Era, dude. I'm talking about go before then. And don't just watch the old WWF. Don't just watch the birds, the snakes, the dogs, the parakeets and all that, whatever other crap they had going at the time of the circus of the World Wrestling Federation, and Vince McMahon was the ringmaster. I'm not talking about that, dude, at all. I'm talking about the glory days of championship wrestling. I'm talking about the NWA, some AWA, world class with the Von Erich family versus the Freebirds. You want to talk about one of the best old school rivalries that's ever happened in the history of this business? I mean, you've got the Horsemen versus Dusty Rhodes and his guys. You've got the Freebirds versus the Von Erichs. It doesn't get more old school or more classic than that. I mean, perfect rivalry in every sense of the word, because on one side you had traditional family values. You had a good, clean-cut, all-American guys, even though that's not what they were behind the scenes. Spoiler alert, it's not how they lived, most of them. But on TV, those are the characters you know. You see what I'm saying? Going up against the hard-drinking, hard-living, rock and roll lifestyle of the Fabulous Freebirds. What a great dichotomy. It was Flair versus Steamboat of tag team wrestling, because you had, again, family values, traditional versus the nightlife of Flair versus Steamboat. The Rock and Roll Express versus the Midnight Express. Still to this day, the best tag team feud of all time, by far. And one of the best feuds that's ever happened in the history of the business. You got, again, Flair versus Steamboat. Flair versus Dusty, okay? Magnum versus Nikita. Dude, Nikita Koloff as a kid scared the living daylights out of me. He did. I mean, straight up scared me because he was vicious and he was cold hard and he was like something from another planet, dude. He was ferocious. He was intense. He was jacked up. I never saw Nikita not in shape. I can say that for him. Even when he came back to WCW and had the haircut, remember he had the hair? Oh, it was terrible, right? He had the crew cut. Worst look the dude's ever had. But he was in shape then, too. He'd slimmed down quite a bit. But I don't remember ever seeing Nikita saying, "Wow, it's time to hang it up. Why is he still here?" He always looked great. See what I'm saying? The best guys know when to quit and when to hang it up. Shawn Michaels was one of them. Shawn Michaels was old school in a lot of ways. So was Triple H. I say was because things have kind of changed now. But, Stone Cold Steve Austin, old school kind of wrestler. Undertaker, old school. And what worries me about anything else about the company today, about WWE in particular, specifically actually, is the fact that old school mentality, that old school way of thinking, in my opinion, has the potential to die off, has the potential to dissolve if they're not careful. And I don't want to see it happen. There's too many fans like myself who are still around. There's too many of the younger generation, like, my kid and kids older than my kid and teenagers and whatnot, guys younger than me, who are not familiar with what old school is. They know it by seeing a few matches. And to them, old school is DX versus the Nation. That's not DX. That's not old school, man. It's not. Old school's going back. You got to go back before then, to when there was barely any entrance music. There was hardly any pyro, smoke-filled arenas. And what you had to do to tell a story, was just have the basic conflict between good and evil, right versus wrong. Two guys with a problem, they had to settle in the center of the ring. That's old school, man. That is old school wrestling at its absolute finest. Go watch Dusty versus Rick. You have to. Go watch Dusty Rhodes cut a promo on the Four Horsemen. Watch Magnum TA versus Tully Blanchard in the I Quit match at Starrcade. One of the bloodiest matches to this day that I've ever seen, where the blood meant something. A lot of times blood means nothing. Not so much now because they've cleaned it up a lot, but old ECW, blood meant nothing. Blood meant it was a Saturday night. You see what I'm saying? But blood for Nikita and Magnum meant the world. And it painted that match. It painted the canvas of that match, literally. And it did everything it was supposed to have done at that time. Honestly, it was good stuff. It was great stuff, actually. The story they told. Oh, I could watch that match 100 times, and I have. I could watch 100 more, and I will, and still be as affected. And I talked before about the connection of the old school days. And you can still have that connection to this day, but it's not quite the same, in my opinion, as it used to be. I cried when Magnum had his accident, but I cried when Nikita came down to the ring and helped Dusty as well. I still tear up. To this day, I could watch it right now and still tear up because of the crowd reaction, the way the fans popped, the way that it just felt right. When pro wrestling works at its core, at its base core, is at its finest, when the old school principles are held into place, when the old school principles are being adhered to. And the old school principles say, telling the story is the most important part. Telling a story is what matters the most. Forget everything else and tell your story. See what I'm saying? Quit worrying about money. Quit worrying about the pyro not going off in time. Quit worrying about ratings for 2 minutes. And tell your story, and everything else will follow suit. If you're successful in the ring, then the crowds will come. It's the old Field of Dreams analogy. If you tell the story, then they will come. They'll come to the arena. They'll tune in. They'll buy the merch. They'll watch the network and buy a subscription. And they'll do everything in their power to watch again the next week. But you have to tell the story. You got to get the story right. If the story's not there, forget it. At their most bare essence, professional wrestlers are master storytellers, except they use physical wrestling matches to tell a story instead of using their words. They'll use words in a promo. They'll use their actions to finish the story. They write a book, and the canvas of a pro wrestling ring are their pages. That's their binder. Okay, the pages are the moves in the match. That's how they're telling a story. That's what it is. And just like you can get a story told to you when you go see a great movie or follow your favorite TV show, a lot of great TV shows on. TV's really exploded in the past, 10 years now, thanks to Sopranos and things of that nature, where TV's become a riveting place to be, where at any given time TV would be full of sitcoms and, cheesy police dramas that didn't really wouldn't leave a lasting impact. And these days, it's just exploded thanks to cable TV, thanks to Netflix, thanks to Amazon. Other things. It's just all of that and a lot more. But master storytelling, you know what I mean? Drawing people in, making them want to see it, giving them a reason to leave the comfort of their own home, get into a car they don't want to be in, drive an hour to where they don't want to drive to because they got to see you in the ring. That's what a great storyteller is able to do, okay? And maybe a lot of that doesn't take place in the arenas like it did in the old school days. It takes place, during like big pay-per-view events. Maybe not so much for house shows, but pay-per-views, ratings on TV, watching pay-per-views on TV or on the network or whatever it is. But master storytellers doing their finest work in a pro wrestling ring. That to me is what old school is and what it always will be. I got an old school mentality and old school sensibility when it comes to how I watch professional wrestling, how I view it, and how I absorb it. But make no mistake about it, I'm not one of these old guys that sits back and laments the death of the territories and says that pro wrestling now is complete garbage. If I thought that, I would no longer watch it. It's pretty simple math, dude. I wouldn't waste my time. My time is valuable. I got a lot of stuff on my plate, you know what I mean? And I certainly wouldn't write about it. Again, time is valuable. I'm not going to waste my time writing about something I don't enjoy anymore. So it all comes down to the fact that these guys, the best of the best now, and the guys that are just breaking in today who are learning to become storytellers, when you lose that, when you lose the initial focus, your company is going to fall, whether it's WWE, whether it's Lucha Underground, whether it's New Japan, whether it's Ring of Honor, TNA. When you forget why you're there, and that's to tell your story, then you're going to fall. Because if you believe in your story and your guys believe in it and they wrestle their hearts out, then your fans are going to believe it too. And with any luck, the fans outside that building watching are going to believe it. Next thing you know, you're making some money. That to me is what old school pro wrestling is. Not just Undertaker walking the ropes, God bless him, but old school in terms of your sensibility, the way you think about it, the way you focus on it, the way you absorb it, as I said before. That to me is what old school pro wrestling is. It's alive and well, folks. You just got to find the right writers to read. You got to find the right shows to watch. Go watch WWE Network and look up the old school stuff. You will thank me later. Speaking of writers to read, segue, we have reached the end, and I'm asking again, as always, for your support. Please support the program as you are right now by listening. Thank you very much, and Godspeed with you. But also, please support the writing. It's very important that the writing be supported. You can find me on Bleacher Report. You can find me a highly esteemed Camel Clutch blog. I'm also on Sportskeeda at times. You can also please check out my own blog, tomclarkbr.wix.com/blog. And also go check out my new stuff. This is non-pro wrestling for the most part. tomclarkbr.wix.com/boink. It's a production company, Boink Studios, owned by myself and a great friend, Kyle Smith. We have a new show in the works called Tom and Kyle's Comedy Action Hour that's going to bring to you the best of not only pro wrestling, but comic books, movies, TV that we just talked about, pop culture in general, and everything fun. Speaking of fun, hope you've had some fun. This has been a nice little stroll down memory lane for yours truly. I'm not done talking about old school. One day maybe I'll do another two-parter of this and go back into it again. Old school part 3, perhaps. How about that? That'll be the third in the Trinity. We'll find out when that's going to happen. Maybe soon. Who knows? In the meantime, I got to thank you again for listening. I got to thank you again for reading. I got to remind you that you can follow me at Twitter at TomClarkBR. Please check out the Boink Studios at Boink Studios on Twitter. We have a Facebook page. Just look up Boink Studios. Click the like button, and if you click that sucker enough, you're going to get a cookie. I'm convinced of it. Take my word for it. I would never steer you wrong. Thanks again, folks, for everything. Thanks for listening. Be sure to check me out online. Come back again real soon for the next episode, and thanks again for listening to Tom Clark's Main Event.